Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button to support Battleground Stories. And don't forget to tell me in the comments where you're watching from. You are conducting thermal imaging in a sequoia forest in California where dense fog has settled. It is past midnight. As a trained military reconnaissance soldier, you are performing a routine surveillance mission. Then you see it, a pale-colored object moving upward along a 60-meter tree trunk. It seems to defy gravity, moving upward faster than a human could. My thermal scope should illuminate it like a flashlight, but it only shows it's slightly warmer than the tree bark. Then it stops and turns its head towards you at 80 feet. Corporal Briggs Marlow and his 4-man reconnaissance team shouldn't have encountered that thing in those sequoias. The official report classified it as a misidentified bear, but bears don't leap 60 feet in 2 seconds with controlled precision. They don't silently track military positions, and they certainly don't leave hand-shaped tracks on the ground, bearing the imprint of something with impossibly long fingers. This is a documented military encounter with what the soldiers called the pale reptile. 4 trained observers, physical evidence, thermal imagery, and the government's implausible explanation. You ever been to Northern California? The real Northern California, not San Francisco or wine country. I'm talking about the part where the redwoods grow so tall you can't see their tops, even in daylight, where the fog rolls in thick as wool and doesn't lift for days. Where the silence in those woods isn't peaceful, it's oppressive, like the trees themselves are holding their breath. That's where we were conducting field exercises, mountain warfare training, surveillance and reconnaissance ops in terrain that makes you feel about as significant as an ant at the base of a skyscraper. My name's Sergeant Briggs Marlow, and I've been in the Army for 11 years. I've done rotations in places most Americans can't find on a map. I've pulled security in villages where kids throw rocks at you during the day and someone takes pot shots at your position at night. I've been cold, I've been hungry, I've been so tired I've hallucinated shadows moving in my periphery, but I've never felt watched the way I felt watched in those California redwoods. Our 4-man team had been inserted into the training area 3 days prior. The mission parameters were straightforward. Establish an observation post, monitor simulated enemy activity, maintain noise discipline, gather intelligence, and extract on day 5. Standard reconnaissance stuff. The kind of training evolution we could run in our sleep. Specialist Tanner Beaumont was my spotter and primary observer. Kid had eyes like a damn hawk. He could pick out details at distance that would take me twice as long to identify. Corporal Jonas Valori handled our tracker duties. He'd grown up hunting in Montana, and he could read terrain and signs like some people read newspapers. Then there was PFC Silas Renford, our comms guy, youngest member of the team but sharp as hell with anything electronic. We'd established our position on an elevated ridge overlooking a valley clearing where the OPFOR, opposition forces, were supposed to be staging equipment. Our hide site was tucked between 2 massive redwood trunks with a natural depression that gave us cover and concealment. We'd been there for 2 days without incident, rotating watch, maintaining our log, doing everything by the book. The weirdness started on night 3. It was 23:47 hours. I remember checking my watch because Valori was due to relieve Beaumont at midnight, and I always made sure transitions happened on time. Beaumont was on the optics, doing a thermal sweep of the valley below. Renford was monitoring the radio frequency, keeping his headset volume low. Valori was in his bag trying to catch some sleep before his shift. I was awake, just observing, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness between the trees. The fog had rolled in around 2100 hours and hadn't let up. Visibility was maybe 30 meters, and even that was generous. The thermal imaging could push through most of it, but it turned the world into a monochrome soup of gray and white, with the occasional hot signature standing out like a beacon. Beaumont stiffened. Subtle movement, but I caught it. His hand came off the optic controls and hovered near his rifle for a second before returning to the scope. "Movement," he whispered, so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Northwest sector, 70 meters, base of the cathedral tree." The cathedral tree was what we'd been calling the absolutely massive redwood on the far side of our position. The thing had to be 200 feet tall, maybe 15 feet in diameter at the base. You could have parked a truck inside it if the trunk had been hollow. I shifted position slowly, bringing my own night vision up to scan the area he'd indicated. Through the green glow of the nods, I could see the massive trunk rising into the fog like a pillar holding up the sky. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. "What have you got?" I asked, keeping my voice at the same whisper level. "Something's moving up the tree," Beaumont said. "Can't get a clear thermal read on it. I don't know, Sarge. It's weird." Valori stirred in his sleeping bag, awake now. You develop an instinct in the field. When people start talking, even in whispers, your brain pulls you out of sleep fast. He didn't say anything, just listened. I adjusted my viewing angle, trying to see what Beaumont was tracking. The fog was making everything difficult. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the mist and the nods. Sometimes weather conditions can create false signatures, especially when you're tired and your brain starts filling in patterns that aren't really there. But this wasn't a glitch or misinterpretation. Something was moving up the trunk of that cathedral tree, and it was moving wrong. You know how a squirrel scurries up a tree, quick, jerky, using its claws for traction, pausing every few feet? This wasn't that. You know how a person would climb a tree if they had gear and ropes? This wasn't that either. This thing was flowing upward. That's the only way I can describe it. Like water running up instead of down, or like watching footage of someone climbing in reverse. Smooth, continuous, unnaturally fluid motion. No pauses, no visible effort, just steady upward progress. "Jesus," Valori muttered beside me. He'd pulled his own optics out and was watching now too. The form was pale. That much was clear even through the green tint of night vision. It had a roughly humanoid shape. Head, shoulders, torso, limbs. But the proportions seemed off in ways I couldn't immediately articulate. The arms looked too long, or maybe the torso was too narrow. The movement made it hard to judge exact size, but it was big. Taller than any human when it occasionally paused and seemed to extend itself flat against the bark. "Thermal's giving me almost nothing," Beaumont reported, his voice tight with concentration. "It's barely warmer than the ambient air. Just a slight heat differential. That doesn't make sense for anything mammalian." He was right. Anything living that size, a person, a large animal, should have lit up like a Christmas tree on thermal imaging. But this thing was showing up as only marginally warmer than the tree bark itself. Could it be climbing gear? Renford suggested. Maybe someone in a ghillie suit with thermal masking? I considered it. We were in a military training area. It wasn't impossible that another unit was conducting their own exercises, maybe testing equipment or running counter-surveillance training. But the movement pattern didn't fit. No climber moves that smoothly, that continuously, without gear. And if they had gear, we'd see the hardware. Carabiners, ropes, harness. Even with thermal masking, metal components would show differently than organic material. "Beaumont, switch to standard night vision. Get me a better look at the actual shape," I ordered. He made the switch. We all watched as the form continued its ascent. It had to be 40 feet up the trunk by now, still moving in that unsettling, fluid manner. "I've got it clearer," Beaumont said. Sarge, it doesn't have any equipment. No harness, no ropes, nothing. It's just climbing or crawling. Its limbs are moving, but I can't see what it's gripping with. The angle's not great, but it looks like it's pressed flat against the bark." Valori had gone completely still beside me, his breathing careful and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge I'd never heard from him before. "That's not a person." "What else would it be?" Renford asked, but there wasn't any challenge in his tone, just genuine question. None of us had an answer. The thing, I was already thinking of it as the thing, rather than the person or the climber, continued upward, 50 feet, 60. The fog grew thicker at elevation, and soon we were losing visual contact as it climbed into the dense mist layer. 70 feet up, Beaumont reported. Still visible, barely, still moving at the same steady rate, no sign of fatigue, no pauses. Then it stopped, just froze in place about 80 feet up the massive trunk, pressed flat against the bark. Through the optics, I could make out the pale form contrasting with the dark red-brown of the sequoia bark, but details were getting harder to distinguish through the fog. We all held position, watching, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The thing remained motionless, flat against the tree trunk like some kind of bizarre growth or massive fungus. "Is it sleeping?" Renford whispered. "Do things sleep vertically on tree trunks?" Valori shot back, his voice still carrying that edge. "Bats do," Beaumont offered. "Some insects." "That's not a bat or an insect," I said quietly. "That's something roughly human-sized." We continued to observe. Standard procedure when you encounter something unknown is to document it, maintain observation, and report it up the chain. But what exactly was I going to report? That we saw something pale climbing a tree in the dark. At 00:15 hours, the thing moved again, but instead of continuing upward or descending, it shifted horizontally, circling around the trunk in a spiraling motion. Still pressed flat, still moving with that same fluid grace, it worked its way around to the opposite side of the tree, disappearing from our line of sight. "Lost visual," Beaumont reported. "It went around the backside." I made a decision. "Valori, you're with me. We're going to move to a position where we can reacquire visual. Beaumont, you maintain overwatch here. Renford, monitor comms and keep an eye on our 6. "Sarge, is that a good idea?" Renford asked. "I mean, we don't know what that is." "Exactly why we need to identify it," I replied. "Could be relevant to our mission, could be nothing. Either way, we need to know." Valori was already packing his minimal gear. We'd been trained to move silently in any terrain, and the redwood forest floor, thick with fallen needles and layers of decomposing organic matter, was actually ideal for quiet movement. No dry leaves to crunch, no twigs to snap under boot. Just soft, yielding earth. We moved out from the hide site, weapons at low ready, spacing ourselves about 10 feet apart. The fog was so thick now that even with night vision, Valori looked like a ghost moving through green mist beside me. The cathedral tree was 70 meters from our position. At our pace, moving tactically and maintaining noise discipline, it took us nearly 15 minutes to close the distance. Every few steps I'd pause, scanning with my optics, checking our surroundings, making sure we weren't walking into something unexpected. As we approached the massive trunk, the sheer scale of it became even more impressive. The bark was deeply furrowed, with ridges and channels that created a landscape all their own on the vertical surface. Some of those furrows were deep enough to put your whole hand into. Valori tapped my shoulder and pointed upward. I followed his gesture, angling my night vision to scan up the length of the trunk. The thing was still there. We could see it now from a different angle, about 70 feet up, on the side of the tree facing away from our original position. It remained motionless, pressed against the bark, that pale form standing out against the darker background. From this closer position, maybe 30 meters from the tree's base, I could make out more details. The way its limbs were positioned, it definitely had 4 of them, configured like arms and legs, but the proportions were unsettling. The arms seemed too long, reaching both up and to the sides, splayed wide. The legs were bent, knees pointing outward, feet positioned far apart on the trunk. And its head, there was definitely a head, a bulbous shape at the top of the torso, was angled downward, toward us. "Sarge," Valori breathed. "Is it looking at us?" I felt ice slide down my spine. We'd been so focused on observing it, documenting it, that I hadn't considered the obvious reciprocal. What if it was observing us? We froze in place. In reconnaissance work, one of your primary defenses is stillness. Movement draws the eye, especially in low light conditions. If something's looking in your general direction but hasn't keyed on your specific location, staying motionless can mean the difference between remaining undetected and being compromised. So we stood there, partially concealed behind a smaller redwood, not moving, barely breathing, watching this pale thing clinging to the tree trunk 80 feet above us. And it didn't move either. Standoff. The fog continued to roll through the forest, thickening and thinning in irregular patterns. Sometimes the thing would be clearly visible. Other times it would fade to a pale blur, but it never moved, and neither did we. Time does weird things when you're in a tense situation like that. My watch said we stood there for 8 minutes, but it felt like an hour. My legs started to ache from holding position. My neck protested the angle I was maintaining to keep visual on the target. But discipline held. We didn't move. Then it moved. Without any warning, without any apparent preparation, the thing simply detached from the trunk and dropped. Not fell. Dropped. There's a difference. When something falls, you see the acceleration, the flailing, the impact of gravity taking over. This was controlled descent, straight down, impossibly fast, like watching a spider descend on an invisible thread. It dropped what had to be 60 feet in less than 2 seconds, stopping abruptly about 20 feet above the ground, pressed against the trunk again in that same splayed position. "Holy shit," Valori whispered, and I couldn't blame him for breaking noise discipline because my thoughts were exactly the same. From this height, maybe 30 feet away from us laterally and 20 feet above the ground, we could see it much more clearly. The pale skin, if it was skin, had an almost luminescent quality in the night vision, standing out sharply against the dark bark. The limbs were definitely too long for human proportions, especially the arms, which seemed to have an extra joint or an unusual range of articulation. And the head. God, the head. It was hairless, smooth, and shaped wrong. Not grossly deformed, but subtly off in ways that triggered every primate instinct in my brain, screaming that this wasn't right, this wasn't human, this was other. Then it tilted its head, a quick, sharp motion like a bird, and I could swear it was looking directly at us. Valori's hand tightened on his rifle grip. I could feel the tension radiating off him. Every combat instinct we'd trained was lighting up. Identify threat, assess danger, prepare response. But we held position. The thing cocked its head the other direction, maintaining that unblinking focus in our direction. Then, with that same fluid motion, it began moving down the trunk again. Not the controlled drop like before, but the steady crawl, flowing downwards like liquid following gravity. 20 feet became 15. 15 became 10. It was descending toward ground level, toward us. "Sarge?" Valori's voice was tight, barely controlled. Question clear in that single word. What do we do? I was running calculations. We were armed. We had superior firepower. But we were on a training exercise on domestic soil. Rules of engagement were completely different. You can't just start shooting unknown entities in a California forest without severe consequences. But you also can't let an unknown potential threat get within striking distance. The thing reached the base of the tree about 8 feet above ground level and stopped again. From this position, it was finally at our eye level, 30 feet of distance between us and it. And in that moment, as my night vision gave me the clearest look I'd had yet, I saw details that my brain has been trying to reject ever since. The skin wasn't just pale. It was wrong. Too smooth. Too uniform. Like plastic, or wax rather than living tissue. The proportions of the limbs weren't just odd, they were physically improbable. Those arms had too much length for the torso they were attached to. The hands, I could see the hands now, pressed flat against the bark, had fingers that seemed too many or too long. I couldn't tell which in the shadows and fog. And the face. Jesus Christ, the face. It didn't have features the way faces should. No nose that I could see, or maybe the nose was so flat and small it didn't register. The eyes were there. I could see them, dark pits in the pale face, but they were positioned slightly too far apart and angled wrong. And the mouth, if that's what it was, just a thin, dark line that seemed too wide for the head. Valori made a sound beside me, something between a whimper and a growl, a noise of pure primal fear that he couldn't quite suppress. The thing's head snapped toward him at the sound. Fast. Too fast for any natural motion. 0 to 60 instant rotation, locked on Valori's position with mechanical precision, and then it moved toward us, not down to the ground and walking. It moved horizontally along the trunk, still clinging to the vertical surface, crawling sideways around the base of the massive tree toward our position with that same flowing motion that defied physics and biomechanics. "Fall back," I ordered, voice low but urgent. Controlled movement. Maintain visual. Weapons ready. We backpedaled, maintaining our spacing, keeping the thing in sight as it continued its lateral crawl around the tree trunk. It was tracking us, adjusting its direction as we moved, staying oriented toward our position. 25 feet between us now, then 20. It was gaining. "Sarge, do we engage?" Valori asked, and I heard the fear in his voice mixing with training, discipline warring with panic. "Not yet," I said, though my thumb had already moved to my selector switch. "Keep moving." The thing reached the point where the trunk faced directly toward us, and it stopped again, flat against the bark, limbs splayed, head tilted in that bird-like way, those dark eyes locked on us. We were 40 feet away now, having increased our distance with the tactical withdrawal. Fog swirled between us and it, sometimes obscuring it completely, sometimes clearing enough to show the pale form pressed against the dark wood. Then it made a sound. Not a growl, not a scream, something between a wheeze and a clicking noise, rhythmic and rapid, like someone rapidly clicking their tongue while forcing air through their throat. Mechanical almost, insectoid. Every hair on my body stood up. "Fuck this, I'm calling it in," I said, pulling out my radio. "Beaumont, you copy?" "Copy, Sarge," came his immediate response in my earpiece. "What's your situation?" "We've made contact with an unknown entity," I reported, keeping my voice level despite everything. "Something's wrong out here. We're withdrawing to your position. Keep watch for our approach." "Roger that. What kind of entity? Human?" I looked at the thing pressed against the tree, still making that horrible clicking wheeze sound, still watching us with those wrong eyes in that wrong face. "Negative," I replied. "Not human. Unknown. Possibly wildlife. Possibly. I don't know what it is. Just be ready." We continued our withdrawal, moving through the fog, putting distance between us and the cathedral tree. I kept glancing back, checking to make sure it wasn't following. It didn't follow. It just stayed there, pressed against that trunk, that pale form gradually fading as fog and distance obscured it. But I could still hear that clicking sound cutting through the silence of the forest. We made it back to the hide site, and Beaumont and Renford's faces, when they saw our expressions, told me we probably looked as rattled as we felt. "What the hell did you see?" Renford asked. I didn't answer immediately. I was trying to process it myself, trying to organize the observations into some kind of coherent report, trying to fit what we'd witnessed into any framework that made sense. Valori spoke first, his voice still shaky. "I don't know what we saw, but it wasn't anything I've ever seen before. And I've hunted since I was 8 years old. That wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar, wasn't any kind of wildlife I know." "Could it have been a person?" Beaumont pressed. "Someone in costume, or maybe someone experiencing a mental health crisis." "Moving like that?" Valori shook his head. No person moves like that. No person could move like that. I pulled out my tactical notebook and started writing down everything we'd observed. Timestamps, descriptions, behaviors. Documentation is crucial. Memory gets fuzzy, details get lost, especially when you're tired and stressed. Writing it down while it was fresh was essential. As I wrote, questions circled in my mind. What was it? Where did it come from? What was it doing climbing that tree? Was it hunting? Was it territorial? Was it aggressive or just curious? And the biggest question, was it still out there, watching us right now? We maintained strict security for the rest of the night, rotating watch every hour instead of our usual 2-hour shifts, keeping weapons at ready, staying alert. The fog never lifted, and the darkness under those massive trees felt heavier than before, more oppressive, like the forest itself had become hostile. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the fog rather than actual sunrise. Colors returned to the world gradually, the red-brown of the bark, the deep green of the needles, the various shades of brown and tan on the forest floor. When there was enough light to move safely, I made the call. "We're going to the cathedral tree," I told the team. "I want to examine the trunk where we saw that thing climbing." "Are you serious?" Renford asked. "What if it's still there?" "Then we'll deal with it in daylight, with full visibility," I replied. "But I need to see if there's any physical evidence. If we're going to report this up the chain, I want more than just witness testimony." Valori nodded slowly. "Tracks, sign, something concrete." We moved out as the sun continued its weak attempt to penetrate the forest canopy and fog layer. The walk back to the cathedral tree felt different in daylight. The fog was still thick, reducing visibility to maybe 50 meters, but there was something about having natural light, even the weak filtered kind, that made the forest feel less hostile. Or maybe we were just lying to ourselves. Beaumont took point, rifle up, scanning sectors. I followed at interval, with Valori behind me and Renford pulling rear security. Standard patrol formation, but everyone was wound tight. You could feel it in the way we moved. Less fluid than usual, more mechanical, like our bodies were operating on pure training while our minds were elsewhere. The massive redwood came into view through the mist, that enormous trunk rising up and disappearing into the fog layer above. Even in daylight, the scale of it was humbling. Maybe 200 feet tall, 15 feet across at the base. You could have fit 3 people standing side by side inside the circumference. We approached cautiously, establishing a security perimeter before I moved in close to examine the bark. "What are we looking for?" Renford asked, his voice quiet despite the increased visibility. "Claw marks," Valori answered before I could. "Scat, hair, anything that indicates what kind of animal that was." "If it was an animal," Beaumont muttered. I ignored that and focused on the trunk. The bark of old-growth redwoods is deeply textured, thick, fibrous, with vertical furrows and ridges that create natural handholds. If something climbed this tree, especially something as large as what we'd observed, there should be evidence. And there was. But it wasn't what I expected. The marks started about 6 feet up the trunk and continued in a vertical line up to where the fog obscured the higher sections. They weren't claw marks, not gouges or scratches like you'd see from a bear or a cougar. These were compression marks. Areas where the bark had been pressed, flattened, smoothed down by pressure. I ran my hand over one of them. The bark felt different there, compressed, the natural texture muted. The mark was roughly the size of my hand, maybe slightly larger, and shaped like an elongated oval. "Valori, come look at this," I called. He moved up beside me, studying the marks with his tracker's eye. He touched several of them, examining the pattern, working his way up as far as he could reach. "These aren't from claws," he said, confirming my own assessment. "This is pressure, like something with a flat surface pressed hard against the bark." "Could it be from climbing equipment?" Beaumont suggested. "Like someone using ascenders or a harness." Valori shook his head. Wrong pattern. Climbing gear leaves different marks, metal scratches, rope friction. This is organic pressure, like something gripping with, I don't know, suction maybe, or just incredible grip strength pressing flat against the surface. I looked up, following the line of marks. They continued in a remarkably straight vertical path, evenly spaced, consistent pressure depth. Whatever made them had climbed with methodical precision. The marks matched the movement pattern we observed, I said. Continuous, steady, no pauses. This thing didn't climb by finding handholds, it just went straight up. How? Renford asked. What kind of animal can do that? None of us had an answer. I pulled out my camera, standard issue for reconnaissance documentation, and started photographing the marks. Multiple angles, with and without my hand in frame for scale reference. Professional documentation for the report I was going to have to write. As I worked my way around the trunk, following the trail of compression marks, I found something else. Got something here, I called out. The others moved to my position. About 8 feet up, where the thing had first stopped during its descent toward us, there was a different kind of mark, not compression, but scratches. 4 parallel lines, each about 3 inches long, gouged into the bark. The wood beneath was exposed, pale and fresh. Valori examined them closely. 4 digits, long. Spacing suggests a hand span wider than human. Could be 4 claws, Beaumont offered. Could be 4 fingers, I countered. We stared at those marks for a long moment, considering the implications. We should collect a sample, Valori said. Scrape some of this bark, see if there's any biological residue, skin cells, oils, anything. I nodded. He pulled out his knife and carefully scraped some of the compressed bark into a plastic evidence bag we used for documenting materials during training. Not exactly a proper evidence collection kit, but better than nothing. As he worked, I continued documenting with the camera, building a comprehensive record of what we'd found. The marks, the pattern, the location, everything. Sarge, Beaumont called from the other side of the tree. You need to see this. I moved around the massive trunk to where he stood, looking down at the forest floor. The ground there was covered in the typical redwood detritus, fallen needles, small pieces of bark decomposing organic matter. But there was a clear disturbance in the pattern. Something had been there. Recently, the disturbed area was roughly circular, maybe 4 feet in diameter. The needles and debris had been compressed, pushed aside in some places, and there was a clear impression in the soft earth beneath, but it wasn't a footprint. Or, if it was like no footprint I'd ever seen. The impression showed 5 distinct pressure points arranged in a radial pattern, 1 central depression, and 4 outer ones, like a hand pressed flat into the ground, but massive. Each of those outer depressions was the size of my fist. What the hell left that? Beaumont asked. Valori crouched down, examining it carefully without touching. This is fresh, within the last 12 hours. The edges are still crisp. If this was older, they'd be breaking down, especially with the humidity. That's where it landed, I said, looking up at the trunk, tracking the sight line from the impression to where we'd last seen the thing about 20 feet up. When we backed away, it must have come down to ground level after we left. And then it walked away, Valori finished, pointing to another, less distinct impression about 6 feet away, heading deeper into the forest. There. Another one. And there. He was right. Once you knew what to look for, you could see the trail. A series of those strange radial impressions, irregular spacing, heading away from the cathedral tree and deeper into the woods. It was on all 4s, Beaumont said quietly, walking on its hands and feet. The mental image that conjured was disturbing. That pale form we'd seen clinging to the tree, now down on the ground, crawling through the forest on elongated limbs, heading to... where? What was it doing? Where did it live? I photographed everything, documenting each impression, the trail pattern, the spacing. Valori collected another sample, scraping some of the compressed earth into a separate bag. "Should we follow it?" Renford asked, and I could hear the reluctance in his voice even as he made the suggestion. I considered it. Part of me wanted to. The reconnaissance mission mindset was strong. Unknown entity, potential threat, need to identify and assess, following the trail, finding where it went, maybe discovering what it actually was. But the tactical side of my brain was throwing up red flags. We were in dense fog, in unfamiliar terrain, tracking something we didn't understand and couldn't categorize. Something that moved in ways that didn't match any known wildlife. Something that had watched us with clear intelligence and intent. Negative, I decided. We've got documentation, we've got physical evidence, we've got detailed observations. That's enough. We extract on schedule, file the report, let command decide next steps. I could see the relief on Renford's face, and honestly, I felt it too. Whatever that thing was, I didn't want to encounter it again without better preparation and understanding. We spent another 30 minutes documenting the site, taking measurements, collecting samples, establishing a detailed record of everything we'd found. Professional, thorough, by-the-book reconnaissance work. As we prepared to move back to our observation post, Valori stood at the base of the cathedral tree, looking up into the fog. "You know what bothers me most?" he said quietly. "What's that?" I asked. "How silent it was. That thing moved, and we never heard it. Not the climbing, not the descent, nothing. Until it made that sound at us. It was completely silent." He was right. I'd been so focused on the visual aspects, the movement, the appearance, the behavior, that I hadn't fully processed the acoustic element, or lack thereof. "Predator behavior," Beaumont said. "Stealth hunters are silent. Cougars, owls, they move without sound. Cougars and owls don't climb 200 feet up a tree and then stare at people for 10 minutes. Valori shot back. "Fair point." We moved back to the observation post in silence, each of us processing what we'd found, what it meant, what it implied. The fog stayed thick all morning, reducing our ability to conduct surveillance on the valley below. But, honestly, my mind wasn't on the training mission anymore. Back at the hide site, I sat down with my notebook and started writing the report. Every detail, every observation, everything we documented. Timestamps, descriptions, measurements, photographs, physical samples. Building a case, making sure that when I submitted this up the chain, there would be no question about what we'd witnessed. "You think Command will believe us?" Renford asked as he watched me write. "I think Command will believe we saw something," I replied. "Whether they believe what we saw matches what we think we saw, that's different." "What do you think we saw?" Beaumont asked. I stopped writing and looked at him. Good question. What did I think? "I think we saw something that doesn't fit into our normal understanding of wildlife," I said carefully. "Something with behaviors and capabilities that seem impossible based on known biology. Either we witnessed an animal species that hasn't been documented, or we witnessed something else entirely." "Like what?" Renford pressed. "I don't know," I admitted. "That's the problem. I don't have a framework for this. Nothing in my training or experience gives me a reference point." Valori had been quiet, but now he spoke up. "My grandfather used to tell stories. He was full-blood Blackfoot, grew up on the reservation. He had stories about things in the mountains, pale things that walked wrong, that watched from the trees, that didn't belong to the natural world." "Stories," Beaumont said, but his tone wasn't dismissive. It was question-asking. "Stories based on something," Valori replied. "Every culture has them. Wendigo, skinwalkers, crawlers, rake, different names but similar descriptions. Pale, elongated, wrong proportions, moves in unnatural ways. I always thought they were just campfire tales." "Maybe they were," I said. "Or maybe there's something out here that inspired those stories. Something rare enough that most people never see it, but real enough that occasionally someone does. We sat with that for a while, the fog pressing in around our position, the forest silent except for the occasional drip of condensation from the branches above. The rest of that day passed without incident. We maintained our observation schedule, rotated watch, conducted our mission as planned. But the atmosphere had changed. Everyone was more alert, more tense, constantly scanning the tree line, looking up into the canopy, watching for movement that shouldn't be there. Night fell again, and with it came the familiar anxiety. Knowing that thing was out there somewhere, knowing it could move silently, knowing it could be watching us without our knowledge. I doubled the watch, always 2 people awake now instead of 1. Better to be tired than surprised. The night passed slowly. Every sound seemed amplified. The whisper of wind through needles, the creak of branches, the distant call of an owl. Normal forest sounds that now carried weight, potential meaning. At 3:42 hours, Beaumont grabbed my arm. "Movement," he whispered. "Thermal contact. Northwest sector, 120 meters." I was instantly alert, optics up, scanning the indicated area. Through the thermal imaging, I could see it. A faint heat signature, barely distinguishable from the ambient temperature, moving through the trees. Horizontal movement this time, not climbing. Ground level, quadrupedal gait. "Same low thermal output," Beaumont reported. "It's circling our position. Range now 100 meters, still moving." We tracked it for nearly 20 minutes as it moved in a wide arc around our hide site, maintaining distance, never approaching directly, never breaking pattern. "It's checking us out," Valori said quietly. "It knows we're here, and it's observing us." "Like we observed it," I replied. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. We'd come out here to conduct surveillance, to watch and document. Now, something was doing the same to us. Eventually, the thermal signature faded, moving away into the deeper forest, disappearing into the terrain and fog. We maintained heightened alert for another hour, but it didn't return. When dawn came, I made the decision to extract early. We'd documented what we'd found, we had our evidence, and there was no tactical advantage to staying in an area where an unknown entity had demonstrated clear interest in our position. We broke down the hide site, packed our gear, and moved to the extraction point. The fog was finally lifting, morning sun breaking through in shafts of light between the massive trunks, revealing the true scale of the forest around us. As we waited for transport, I found myself looking back into the woods, scanning the tree line, searching for that pale form in the shadows. I didn't see it, but I felt watched. That primal awareness that something's eyes are on you, even when you can't see them. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe the stress of the encounter had put me on edge. Or maybe it was still out there, pressed flat against some distant trunk, observing us with those dark, wrong eyes in that wrong, pale face. The helicopter arrived, and we loaded up quickly. As we lifted off, gaining altitude above the canopy, I looked down at the sea of redwoods stretching in every direction, fog still clinging to the valleys between them. Somewhere down there, something lived. Something that didn't fit into our understanding of the natural world. And I had no idea what it was. The flight back to base was quiet. None of us spoke over the headset comms, each processing what we'd experienced in our own way. I spent the time organizing my notes, making sure the documentation was complete, preparing for what I knew would be a difficult conversation with command. When we landed and offloaded our gear, the operations officer was waiting, Captain Hendricks, a career infantry officer with 3 deployments and 0 tolerance for bullshit. "Sergeant Marlow," he said as I approached. "You called for early extraction. What's the situation?" I handed him my field notebook, opened to the relevant pages. "Sir, we encountered an unidentified entity during night operations. Large, bipedal, capable of climbing, exhibited unusual behavior. We documented physical evidence and collected samples. Full report to follow." He read through my notes, his expression shifting from skeptical to concerned as he progressed through the pages. "You're telling me you saw something climbing trees at night that you couldn't identify?" he asked. "Yes, sir. All 4 members of my team observed it. We have thermal imaging records, photographs, physical evidence from the site." "Could it have been a person, someone from another unit?" "Negative, sir. Movement patterns were inconsistent with human capabilities. Thermal signature was wrong for human biology. Physical evidence doesn't match human proportions." He closed the notebook and looked at me hard. "What do you think it was, Sergeant?" "I don't know, sir, but it was real. It was there, and it showed active interest in our position." Captain Hendricks nodded slowly. "Get cleaned up. Get your team debriefed individually and have full written reports on my desk by 1400 hours. I'm going to need to kick this upstairs." "Understood, sir." The individual debriefs were exactly what you'd expect. Each team member recounted their observations, timelines matched, details corroborated. Beaumont's technical descriptions of the thermal signatures. Valori's analysis of the physical evidence. Renford's documentation of our radio logs showing when we'd first called in the contact. 4 trained observers, all describing the same impossible thing. By 1400 hours, I had the formal report completed. 12 pages, single-spaced, with annotated photographs and a detailed timeline. I included the evidence bags with the bark samples and compressed earth. Professional, factual, leaving nothing out but also making no wild claims. Just observations and documentation. Captain Hendricks read it in his office while I stood at attention. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. "This is going to generate questions," he said. "Questions I don't have answers for." "I understand, sir. Wildlife Services will probably want to investigate. Maybe fish and game, possibly even CDC if there's concern about unknown species." "Yes, sir." He looked at the photographs again, particularly the ones showing the compression marks on the tree and the strange radial impressions on the ground. "For what it's worth, Sergeant, I believe you saw something. Your team's too experienced to fabricate this, and the evidence is compelling. What you saw? I don't know. But it's documented now. That's what matters." "Thank you, sir." 3 days later, I was called back to the operations office. This time, there were 2 additional people present. A civilian in outdoor gear with a wildlife agency patch, and a serious-looking woman in business casual with no identification I could see. "Sergeant Marlow," Captain Hendricks began, "this is Dr. Patterson from California Fish and Wildlife, and this is Miss Reeves. She's with Federal Wildlife Management." The vague introduction told me Ms. Reeves was probably something other than fish and wildlife, but I didn't press. Dr. Patterson spoke first. "I've reviewed your report and the photographic evidence. The compression marks are interesting, but they could be explained by several known species. Black bears do sometimes climb and leave similar patterns. The ground impressions are harder to explain, but not impossible." "What about the observed behavior?" I asked. "The climbing pattern, the speed, the thermal signature." "Night observation in fog can be unreliable," he replied, not unkindly. "Misjudgment of distance and speed is common. Thermal imaging can be affected by atmospheric conditions. I'm not saying you didn't see an animal, but I think the specifics might be less unusual than they appeared in the moment." Translation. He was giving me an out, acknowledging we saw something while providing rational explanations that avoided the uncomfortable reality of what we'd actually witnessed. Ms. Reeves had been silent, but now she spoke. "Did it display any aggressive behavior toward your team?" Interesting question. Very specific. "No," I answered. "It observed us. It maintained distance. It circled our position once, but never approached within tactical range. No overtly aggressive actions." "Did it vocalize? Any sounds you can describe?" "Yes, a clicking sound, rhythmic, combined with a wheezing exhale. Nothing I've heard from known wildlife." She wrote something in a small notebook. And you're certain all 4 team members saw the same entity? Yes, ma'am. Multiple independent observations, corroborating details, consistent descriptions. She nodded and looked at Captain Hendricks. I'd like to recommend that Sergeant Marlow and his team receive additional training guidance on wildlife identification in low light conditions. Standard precautionary measure. That was the end of it, officially. We'd seen a bear, or possibly a cougar, observed under difficult conditions with natural misperception of details. Case closed. Report filed. Everyone moves on. Except that's not what happened. 2 weeks later, Valori pulled me aside during PT. Sarge, you remember that thing we saw? Hard to forget. I've been doing research. Online forums, cryptozoology sites. Yeah, I know how it sounds. But there are other reports, dozens of them. Different locations, California, Oregon, Washington, even back east. People describing the same thing. Pale, elongated, climbing trees, wrong proportions, silent movement. People see lots of things, I said carefully. Doesn't mean they're real. Multiple independent witnesses seeing the same thing in different locations, he countered. That's not coincidence. That's pattern. He showed me printouts he'd made, forum posts, blog entries, anonymous submissions to paranormal websites. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. Pale humanoid forms, abnormal climbing ability, observed at night, displaying curiosity toward human presence, but rarely aggressive. Some called them crawlers, some called them pale ones, some called them rakes. Different names for what seemed to be the same phenomenon. There's one report from a ranger in Olympic National Forest, Valori said, pointing to a particular entry. 3 years ago, he describes almost exactly what we saw. Same behavior, same appearance. He filed an official incident report, and it disappeared into the system. Never investigated publicly. What are you suggesting? I asked. I'm suggesting that whatever we saw isn't unique. It's not a one-off aberration. There's something out there in these forests, multiple specimens probably, that doesn't fit into our cataloged wildlife, and somebody knows about it. I thought about Ms. Reeves and her very specific questions, her careful avoidance of identification, her immediate pivot to the wildlife misidentification explanation. If that's true, I said slowly, then why the cover-up? Why not document it properly, study it scientifically? Valori shrugged. Maybe they are studying it, just not publicly, or maybe they don't know what it is either. And they're worried about mass panic. Think about it. Unknown species, humanoid appearance, showing intelligence and curiosity toward humans, that would generate serious public reaction. He had a point. The social implications of confirming something like that would be substantial. Or maybe, I offered, there's a simpler explanation we're missing. Maybe it's just a very rare animal species that happens to have unusual characteristics, and the similarity in reports is because people describing something unfamiliar tend to use similar terms. You really believe that, Sarge? I thought about that pale form pressed against the cathedral tree, the way it moved, flowing upward in defiance of physics. Those dark eyes in that wrong face, watching us with clear intelligence. The methodical way it circled our position, observing, assessing. No, I admitted, I don't. The weeks turned into months. The official line remained. We'd encountered a black bear, or possibly a mountain lion, under difficult observation conditions. The evidence was filed away. The report was archived. Life moved on. But I found myself paying attention to things I hadn't before. News stories about hikers reporting strange encounters in wilderness areas. Forest Service reports of unusual animal activity, patterns in missing persons cases from remote locations. Most of it was probably nothing. People get lost in the woods all the time for mundane reasons. Wildlife behaves strangely for mundane reasons. Human pattern recognition sees connections that aren't there. But some of it made me wonder. 6 months after our encounter, Beaumont was transferred to a different unit. Before he left, we had a drink at the NCO club. "You still think about it?" he asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "You?" "More than I'd like to." He took a pull from his beer. "I've been having dreams. That clicking sound. Those eyes. The way it moved. Dreams or nightmares. Bit of both." He set down the bottle. "You know what bothers me most? We were trained to identify threats, assess situations, make tactical decisions. But that thing, I had no framework for it. And that feeling of being out of my depth, that stays with you." I understood. The uncertainty was worse than the fear. That was 3 years ago. I'm out of the service now. Honorable discharge, back to civilian life. I work in security consulting, teaching threat assessment and tactical awareness. Good job, decent pay, normal life. But I still think about that night in the redwood forest. The way that pale form moved up the tree trunk like gravity didn't apply. The intelligence in those dark eyes. The methodical way it observed us, learning, assessing, deciding we weren't a threat before moving on. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, climbing through those massive trees, remaining just on the edge of confirmed reality. And when I'm camping or hiking in deep woods, I find myself looking up into the trees, scanning the shadows, watching for movement that shouldn't be there. Because now I know what to look for. There are things in the forests, old things, rare things, things that have learned to avoid human contact, things that watch from the shadows and the heights, that move without sound, that exist in the gaps of our knowledge. We saw one. We documented it. We reported it. And then we were told, politely and professionally, to accept a simpler explanation and move on. But I can't unsee what I saw. Somewhere in the Northern California redwoods, in the thick fog and towering trees, something climbs in the darkness. Something pale, something silent, something that doesn't belong in any textbook or field guide. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it came from. But I know it's real, and I know it's still out there. If you ever find yourself in old-growth forest at night, in thick fog, surrounded by trees that rise higher than you can see, pay attention, stay alert, look up occasionally, scan the trunks, watch for things that don't move quite right. And if you see something pale pressed against the bark 80 feet up, watching you with dark eyes in a face that's almost but not quite human, don't approach it. Don't try to explain it away. Just document it if you can and move away slowly. Because whatever it is, it's been out there a long time. And it's very good at staying hidden. I still have the photograph somewhere, filed away in a box in my closet. Evidence that something was there. Something real. Something unexplained. And every time I look at those photographs, I feel the same awareness I felt that night in the forest. The awareness that the world is bigger and stranger than we acknowledge. That there are spaces in our understanding where impossible things exist. That sometimes, in the darkness and the fog, we catch glimpses of those things. I saw it. My team saw it. We know what we witnessed. The rest of the world can believe what it wants.